The most valuable word in the English language might just be one you've been taught to avoid. It's simple, just 2 letters. But most people find it harder to say than words with 5 syllables. That word is no. You see, your life is built decision by decision, and every time you say yes to something, you're automatically saying no to something else. That's just how time works. There are only 24 hours in your day, just like everyone else's. The question is, are you filling those hours with your priorities or someone else's? I've watched thousands of people over the years, successful ones, struggling ones. And I noticed something interesting. The successful ones aren't necessarily saying yes to more opportunities. Often they're just better at saying no to the wrong ones. Now, I'm not talking about being negative. I'm talking about being selective. There's a big difference. One leads to isolation, the other leads to success. When was the last time you said no to something without following it up with a lengthy explanation? Without feeling that twist of guilt in your stomach? Without worrying what the other person might think of you? If you're like most people, you can't remember, because we've been conditioned to believe that saying no is somehow impolite or selfish. But let me tell you something that might change your life. Your no doesn't require an explanation. And once you understand that, you'll find a kind of freedom you never knew existed. When you learn to say no without justifying yourself, you take back control of your life. And control of your life is where all good things begin. Think about it. Every time you say yes when you want to say no, you're making a withdrawal from your own life. You're giving away pieces of your most valuable assets, your time. And unlike money, you can't earn more time. Once it's spent, it's gone forever. I've seen so many people run themselves ragged saying yes to every request, every favor, every opportunity that comes their way. They say yes to their boss who asks them to work late. They say yes to friends who need a favor. They say yes to family members who want more of their time. They say yes to committees and boards and volunteer opportunities. And at the end of the day, they wonder why they never have time for the things that matter most to them. They wonder why their biggest goals remain unfulfilled. They wonder why they feel so exhausted, so burnt out, so resentful. They have been saying yes too often and to the wrong things. Every yes comes with a cost. Sometimes that cost is obvious. S is your time, your energy, your focus. But sometimes the cost is hidden. The projects you'll never start, the dreams you'll never pursue, the relationships you'll never nurture because you're too busy fulfilling obligations you didn't really want in the first place. You know, I had a friend who was the nicest guy you'd ever meet. He'd drop everything to help you move furniture, to drive you to the airport, to listen to your problems. Everyone loved him because he never said no. But do you know what happened to him? His own dreams got pushed aside. His own needs went unmet. His own goals gathered dust because he was too busy saying yes to everyone else's priorities. Don't let that happen to you. You owe yourself more than that. Now, why do we feel this need to explain ourselves when we say no? Why do we feel we need to justify our decisions to others? It starts early. As children, we're taught to be agreeable, to be helpful, be kind. These are wonderful qualities. But somewhere along the way, some of us learned that saying no means being disagreeable, unhelpful, or unkind. And that's simply not true. We also fear judgment. We worry that if we say no without a good enough reason, people will think less of us. They'll think we're selfish or lazy or uncaring. And so we scramble to find excuses, to craft explanations that will make our no acceptable in their eyes. But here's the truth. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. They're wrapped up in their own lives, their own concerns, their own priorities. Your no is a momentary disappointment, quickly forgotten as they move on to the next person who might say yes. And those who would judge you harshly for protecting your time and energy, those who would make you feel guilty for prioritizing your well-being and your goals, well, perhaps those aren't the people whose opinions should matter to you anyway. There's another reason we over-explain our refusals. We've been conditioned to believe that no is a complete sentence only for those in positions of power. The boss can say no without explanation. The customer can say no without justification. But the employee, the service provider, the friend, the family member, they need to have a reason. They need to have an excuse. I'm here to tell you that's not true. Your time belongs to you. Your energy belongs to you. Your life belongs to you. And you don't need anyone's permission to protect what's yours. Let's talk about the true value of your time. Not what others think it's worth, but what it's really worth. Your time is the currency of your life. Every minute you spend is gone forever. You can't save it for later. You can't get it back, and you certainly can't make more of it. All you can do is choose how to spend what you have. When you understand the real value of your time, saying no becomes not just easier, but necessary. Because every minute you spend on something that doesn't align with your values or move you toward your goals is a minute wasted. Think about the greatest achievements in history, the greatest inventions, the greatest works of art, the greatest businesses. None of them happened by accident. They happened because someone chose to say no to distractions and yes to focused effort. Michelangelo didn't paint the Sistine Chapel in his spare time. Between doing favors for friends and attending meetings that could have been emails, no, he dedicated himself to his craft. He protected his time fiercely. He said no to anything that would take him away from his work. The same is true for any successful person you admire. They didn't achieve greatness by saying yes to everything. They achieved it by saying no to almost everything except the few things that mattered most. Now, I'm not suggesting you become a hermit or turn your back on the people you care about. Relationships are one of life's greatest treasures. But even in relationships, boundaries are necessary. In fact, the healthiest relationships are those where both parties respect each other's right to say no without demands for explanation or justification. Think about your own life. What are your priorities? What are your goals? What are the things that at the end of your life you'll wish you had given more time to? Now ask yourself, how much of your day is currently dedicated to those things? If the answer is not enough, then you need to get better at saying no to the things that are filling your time instead. Remember, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Make sure you're saying yes to the right things. You know, I've had the privilege of studying successful people for decades, and one thing I've noticed is how they guard their time. They understand its value in a way that most people don't. Warren Buffett, one of the world's most successful investors, once said the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say on almost everything. Think about that. The difference isn't that very successful people do more. It's that they do less, but they do the right things. They focus their time and energy on what matters most. They say no to everything else. Steve Jobs was famous for his focus. When he returned to Apple in 1997, the company was making dozens of products, none of them particularly well. One of the first things Jobs did was cut the product line down to just 4 categories. He said no to everything else. And that focus turned Apple from a company on the brink of bankruptcy into one of the most valuable companies in the world. Saying yes to everything is a recipe for mediocrity. When you spread yourself too thin, you can't excel at anything. When you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one, least of all yourself. I've met so many people who were afraid to say no to their boss, to their clients, to their colleagues. They feared that saying no would damage their career prospects, would make them seem uncooperative or not a team player. But the most respected professionals aren't the ones who say yes to everything. They're the ones who deliver exceptional results on the things they commit to. And they do that by being selective about what they take on. When you say yes to everything, you become known as the person who will do anything, but not necessarily the person who will do anything well. When you learn to say no, you become known as the person who delivers excellence on the things you commit to. Which reputation would you rather have? The same principle applies in your personal life. When you say yes to every social invitation, every request for help, every demand on your time, you become spread so thin that you can't be fully present for any of it. You're there in body, but not in spirit. You go through the motions, but don't make a real impact. But when you're selective, when you choose carefully where to invest your time and energy, you can be fully present. You can give your best, You can make a real difference. And paradoxically, you become more valued, not less. So why is it so hard for us to say no? What's the fear that holds us back? For many, it's the fear of disapproval. We want to be liked. We want to be accepted. We're social creatures, after all. And from an early age, we learn that saying yes gets us approval, while saying no often gets us the opposite. But seeking approval from others is a losing game. Because the truth is, not everyone is going to like you, no matter what you do. Some people will dislike you for saying no. Others will dislike you for saying yes. Some will dislike you simply because of who you are, regardless of what you say or do. Once you accept that universal approval is impossible, it becomes easier to make decisions based not on what others will think, but on what's truly right for you. For others, the fear is deeper. It's the fear of not being enough. We think that by saying yes to everything, we can prove our worth. We can show that we're valuable, that we're needed, that we matter. But your worth isn't determined by how many yeses you give. It's not measured by how much you do for others or how busy your calendar is. Your worth is intrinsic. It's part of who you are, not what you do. And ironically, when you try to prove your worth by saying yes to everything, you often end up feeling even less worthy because you can't possibly fulfill all those commitments well. You end up dropping balls, disappointing people, and confirming your own deepest fears about your inadequacy. But when you recognize your intrinsic worth, when you understand that you don't need to earn your place in the world, saying no becomes easier. Because you're no longer trying to prove anything. You're simply making the choices that are right for you. Some of us fear the consequences of saying no. We worry that opportunities will dry up, that doors will close, that bridges will burn. And yes, sometimes saying no does close a door, but it opens others. Every no creates space for a better yes. Every opportunity declined creates room for a better opportunity to come along. Think about it this way. If your life is already full of okay things, how will you ever have room for the exceptional things? Sometimes you have to clear space in your life before the best opportunities can find their way to you. So now, let's talk about breaking the habit of over-explaining. Because that's what it is, a habit. And like any habit, it can be broken with awareness and practice. The next time someone asks you to do something that doesn't align with your priorities, simply say, "I'm sorry, but I won't be able to do that." That's it. No explanation needed. If they press you for a reason, you can say, "I have other commitments." You don't need to specify what those commitments are. They could be commitments to your work, to your family, to your health, or simply to yourself. Remember, "I don't want to do" is a valid reason, even if it's not one you need to voice out loud. Your time is yours to allocate as you see fit. You don't have to justify your choices to anyone. Now, I know this feels uncomfortable at first. You might feel rude or abrupt. You might worry what the other person is thinking. That's normal. But with practice, it gets easier. And the results, the freedom, the focus, the ability to dedicate yourself fully to what matters most are worth the initial discomfort. Think of it this way. Every time you say no without over-explaining, you're building a muscle. The muscle of self-respect, the muscle of boundary setting, the muscle of prioritization. And like any muscle, it gets stronger with use. You're also teaching others how to treat you. When you feel the need to explain and justify every no, you're sending the message that your decisions require external validation. When you simply state your no, firmly and respectfully, you're sending the message that you trust your own judgment and expect others to respect it too. One technique that can help is to prepare a few go-to phrases that you can use when you need to decline something. Having these ready can prevent you from falling into the trap of over-explaining in the moment. Phrases. "Thank you for thinking of me, but I'm not able to commit to that right now. I appreciate the opportunity, but it's not the right fit for me at this time. I need to pass on this one, but I hope it goes well." Notice that none of these include a specific reason. They simply state your decision clearly and respectfully. Another technique is to buy yourself time. Instead of feeling pressured to say yes on the spot, say, let me check my schedule and get back to you. This gives you space to consider whether the request aligns with your priorities and to formulate a polite no if it doesn't. Remember, you're not obligated to respond to every request immediately. Taking time to consider your response isn't rude, it's responsible. It shows that you take your commitment seriously. When you do say no, say it once and stick to it. Don't leave the door open if you don't intend to walk through it. Don't say not right now, but maybe later if you really mean no, not ever. That kind of hedge might seem kinder in the moment, but it's actually cruel because it gives false hope. Be direct, be clear, and be firm. A clean break heals faster than a drawn maybe. And here's something important. When you say no, don't apologize excessively. A simple "I'm sorry, but I can't" is sufficient. Repeated apologies undermine your decision and invite the other person to try to change your mind. Remember, you're not doing anything wrong by saying no. You're simply making a choice about how to use your time and energy. And that's not just your right, it's your responsibility. Now let's talk about the respect that comes from setting clear boundaries. Because that's what saying no without over-explaining is really about. It's about setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. When you set clear boundaries, people know where they stand with you. There's no ambiguity, no false expectations. And contrary to what you might fear, most people respect clear boundaries. They might not like them. They might wish you had different ones, but they respect them. Think about the people you respect most in your own life. I bet they're people who know what they stand for, who have clear values and priorities, who don't bend with every wind that blows. There are people who can say no when necessary without apology or excessive explanation. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. Setting boundaries often means disappointing people in the short term, but in the long term, it leads to healthier, more authentic relationships. Because the relationships are based on reality, not on a fictitious version of yourself that you can't sustain. When you say yes to everything, you're not really being kind. You're being dishonest. You're pretending to have capacity that you don't have. You're making promises that you can't keep without compromising your well-being or the quality of your work. True kindness isn't about saying yes to everything. It's about being honest about what you can and can't do. It's about showing up fully for the commitments you do make rather than spreading yourself so thin that you're barely there at all. And here's the thing about respect. It has to start with self-respect. If you don't respect your own time and energy, why should anyone else? If you don't believe that your needs and priorities matter, why should anyone else? When you learn to say no without feeling the need to explain yourself, you're demonstrating self-respect. You're showing that you value yourself enough to protect your time and energy, and that self-respect radiates outward, influencing how others perceive and treat you. I've seen this transformation happen countless times. People who were once doormats saying yes to everything, always putting themselves last, learn to set boundaries. They learn to say no without guilt or excessive explanation. And suddenly they find that people are treating them differently, with more respect, more consideration, more regard for their time and energy. It's not magic. It's simply the natural result of starting to value yourself. When you do, others follow suit. Let me share with you some stories of people whose lives were transformed when they learned to say no without explaining themselves. There was Sarah, a talented graphic designer who was always swamped with work. She said yes to every project that came her way, regardless of the timeline, the budget, or her own workload. She feared that if she said no to anything, the opportunities would dry up and her career would suffer. As a result, she was constantly overworked, perpetually stressed, and the quality of her work was beginning to decline. She was on the verge of burnout. Then she made a decision. She would only take on projects that met certain criteria. They had to be interesting, they had to pay well, and they had to fit into her schedule without requiring nights and weekends. And when projects didn't meet those criteria, she would simply say, "I'm not available for this project, but thank you for thinking of me." The first few times were terrifying. She was sure she was committing career suicide. But a funny thing happened. The world didn't end. Some clients went elsewhere, yes. But others respected her boundaries and adjusted their expectations accordingly. And word got around that she was selective about her projects, which paradoxically made her services more in demand. Within a year, she was working less, earning more, and producing her best work ever, all because she learned to say no without feeling the need to justify herself. Then there was Michael, a middle manager at a large corporation. He was known as the go-to guy, the one who would always take on extra work, who would stay late to help a colleague finish a project, who would come in on weekends to tackle the tasks no one else wanted. His colleagues loved him. His boss relied on him. But his health was suffering. His family rarely saw him. And his own career was stagnating because he was so busy doing everyone else's work that he had no time to develop his own skills or pursue promotions. One day, after missing his daughter's piano recital to finish a colleague's report, he realized something had to change. He started saying no to tasks that weren't part of his job description. He started leaving the office at a reasonable hour. He started protecting his weekends. At first, his colleagues were shocked. Some were resentful. His boss was concerned. But Michael stood firm. I'm focusing on my core responsibilities. He would say when asked to take on extra work, no lengthy explanations, no apologies, just a clear statement of his priority. And guess what? Within a few months, something remarkable happened. His colleagues started handling their own work. His boss started distributing tasks more equitably. And Michael found that not only did he have more time for his family and his health, but he was performing better in his actual job because he wasn't spread so thin. 2 years later, he got the promotion he'd been wanting, not despite setting boundaries, but because of it. His boss told him, "You've shown that you can prioritize effectively and manage your time." Exactly the skills we need in a senior leader. These stories aren't unique. They're repeated every day as people discover the power of saying no without over-explaining. And the benefits go beyond just the individual. When you learn to say no effectively, it creates a ripple effect that touches everyone around you. Think about it. When you say yes to everything, you're not just harming yourself. You're also enabling others to avoid responsibility. You're allowing them to offload their work onto you. You're making it possible for them to continue making unreasonable requests because there's no consequence. But when you start saying no, something changes. They have to find another solution. They have to take responsibility. They have to adjust their expectations. And often, that leads to growth for them too. I once worked with a team where one person, Lisa, was doing the work of 3 people because she couldn't say no. When she finally learned to set boundaries, her colleagues initially floundered. They had become dependent on her saying yes to everything. But over time, they adapted. They became more self-sufficient. They learned new skills. They found more efficient ways to work. And the team as a whole became stronger, more balanced, more effective. When you say no appropriately, you're not just protecting yourself. You're contributing to a healthier. The same is true in families. When one person is always saying yes, always taking on more than their fair share, it creates an imbalance. Others may become entitled, expecting that person to always be available, always willing to help, always ready to drop everything for their needs. But when that person learns to say no without guilt or excessive explanation, the family system rebalances. Others step up. Responsibilities are shared more equitably. And often, the relationships improve because they're based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. So you see, learning to say no without explaining yourself isn't selfish. It's not just about protecting your time and energy, although that's important. It's also about creating healthier, more balanced relationships and systems around you. It's about being honest about your capacity, your priorities, and your boundaries. And that honesty is a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone in your life. So where do we go from here? How do we move forward on this path to freedom through decisive action? First, recognize that changing a habit takes time. If you've been over-explaining your no's for years, don't expect to change overnight. Be patient with yourself. Celebrate small victories. Each time you say no without launching into a lengthy explanation, you're making progress. Second, start small. Practice saying no in situations where the stakes are low. Decline a minor social invitation. Say no to a small request at work. Build your confidence gradually before tackling the bigger, more challenging situations. Third, surround yourself with supportive people. Find friends, colleagues, mentors who understand the importance of boundaries, who will encourage you when you falter, who will remind you why you're making these changes, who will model healthy boundary setting in their own lives. Fourth, remind yourself regularly of the cost of saying yes too often. Remember the goals that remain unfulfilled, the dreams that remain deferred, the parts of yourself that remain unexpressed because you're too busy meeting everyone else's needs. Fifth, focus on the positive. Saying no isn't just about what you're rejecting. It's about what you're making space for. Every no to something that doesn't align with your priorities is a yes to something that does. Keep your eyes on what you're gaining, not just on what you're giving up. And finally, remember that this is a journey, not a destination. You won't do it perfectly. There will be times when you fall back into old patterns, when you say yes when you should say no, when you find yourself launching into a lengthy explanation for a simple refusal. That's okay. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're human. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. The goal is to become more conscious of your choices, more intentional about how you spend your time and energy, more respectful of your own boundaries. And each time you say no, without feeling the need to justify yourself, you're moving closer to that goal. So I challenge you today. The next time someone asks you to do something that doesn't align with your priorities, try saying no without explanation. Just a simple, respectful, "I'm sorry, but I won't be able to do that." See how it feels. Notice the urge to explain, to justify, to make excuses, and then resist it. It might be uncomfortable at first. It might feel strange or even wrong. But remember, discomfort is often the price of growth. And the freedom that awaits you on the other side of that discomfort is worth it. Because when you learn to say no without explaining yourself, you reclaim your power. You take back control of your life. You create space for the things that truly matter to you. And in doing so, you don't just change your schedule, you change your life. So go ahead, say no. And keep your explanation to yourself. Your time, your energy, your life belongs to you. And you don't need anyone's permission to protect what's yours.